Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful and inspiring stories in the Bible. The story of Joseph, a young man who went from the depths of a pit to the heights of a palace. His life is filled with trials, betrayals, and triumphs, showing us how God can turn even the most challenging situations into a purpose far greater than we could ever imagine. Join us as we walk through Joseph's journey, exploring the resilience, faith, and lessons that his life offers to each of us. This is a story that reminds us, even in the darkest moments, that God has a plan. Our story begins in Genesis 37, where we meet a young Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, also known as Israel. Joseph was the son of Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, which made Joseph particularly special to his father. Jacob's love for Joseph was so strong that he made a richly ornamented robe, often called the coat of many colors, a gift that only deepened the envy of his brothers. Genesis 37 verse 3. This coat symbolized favor, and his brothers could not understand why Joseph was so favored. Joseph also had a gift, a series of dreams that seemed to predict his future. In one dream, he saw himself and his brothers binding sheaves of grain in the field, and his brothers' sheaves bowed down to his. In another dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed to him. Genesis 37 verses 5 to 9. When Joseph shared these dreams, his brothers were furious. They asked, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" Genesis 37 verse 8. Even his father Jacob rebuked him, though he kept the matter in mind. These dreams would eventually come true, but for now, they only added to the jealousy that would set the next part of Joseph's journey into motion. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending flocks in Dothan. Seeing him approach, his brothers conspired to kill him, saying, "Here comes that dreamer." Genesis 37 verse 19. However, Reuben, the eldest, convinced them not to shed his blood, suggesting instead to throw him into an empty cistern, planning to rescue him later. But while Reuben was away, the brothers spotted a caravan of Ishmaelite traders. Judah then suggested, "What will we gain if we kill our brother? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites instead." Genesis 37 verses 26 to 27. And so, they sold Joseph for 20 shekels of silver. The brothers then dipped Joseph's coat in animal blood and presented it to Jacob, who was devastated, believing his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. This moment marked the beginning of Joseph's life as a slave, but even in his darkest moments, God was with him. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Genesis 39 verse 1. Despite his hardships, Joseph's faith in God remained strong, and God blessed everything he did. Potiphar soon noticed this and put Joseph in charge of his entire household, trusting him completely. However, Joseph's challenges were far from over. Potiphar's wife took an interest in him and attempted to seduce him, but Joseph refused, saying, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39 verse 9. Furious at his rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of assault. As a result, Joseph was thrown into prison, a place where most would lose hope. But even in prison, God was with Joseph, granting him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, who placed him in charge of the other prisoners. While in prison, Joseph encountered two of Pharaoh's former servants, the cupbearer and the baker. Both had dreams that troubled them, and Joseph, recognizing the gift God had given him, offered to interpret them, saying, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Genesis 40 verse 8. He interpreted that the cupbearer would be restored to his position, while the baker would be executed, and his interpretations proved correct. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him once he was restored to Pharaoh's service, but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph, leaving him in prison for 2 more years. Despite the injustice, Joseph held on to his faith, and God continued to prepare him for the day his gift would be called upon again. 2 years later, Pharaoh had 2 dreams that no one could interpret. The cupbearer then remembered Joseph and informed Pharaoh about his gift. Joseph was quickly brought from prison to Pharaoh, where he listened to the dreams and, with God's wisdom, interpreted them. He explained that Egypt would experience 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine, and advised Pharaoh to store surplus grain during the years of plenty. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh declared, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Genesis 41 verse 38. Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt, giving him authority to prepare the land for the coming famine. In a single day, Joseph went from prisoner to ruler, displaying the power of God's timing and purpose. When the famine struck, it affected not only Egypt but surrounding nations, including Canaan, where Joseph's family lived. Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain, unknowingly sending them into the hands of the very brother they had betrayed. When they arrived, Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. He decided to test their hearts, accusing them of being spies and demanding they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to him. Genesis 42. Through a series of tests, Joseph observed his brother's remorse and transformation. Finally, overwhelmed with emotion, Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt," he said, and they were terrified. But Joseph reassured them, saying, "Do not be distressed, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Genesis 45 verse 5. His forgiveness reflected his understanding that God had used even his suffering for a greater purpose. After revealing himself, Joseph invited his entire family to live in Egypt, in the land of Goshen, where they would be provided for during the famine. Jacob was overjoyed to see his son alive and blessed Joseph, marveling at God's providence. Years later, after Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers feared he might seek revenge. But Joseph reassured them again, saying, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50 verse 20. This statement encapsulates the message of Joseph's life, that even in hardship, God's plan is greater than we can imagine. Joseph's story is a testament to faith, resilience, and God's ability to turn even the darkest situations into blessings. From being sold into slavery to becoming a ruler in Egypt, Joseph's journey teaches us that, no matter how hopeless things may seem, God is always working behind the scenes. His life reminds us to trust in God's timing, to remain faithful in every circumstance, and to forgive those who have wronged us, just as Joseph forgave his brothers. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Joseph's incredible life story. May it encourage you to hold on to your faith and trust that God's purpose is unfolding in your life, even when the path is difficult. If this message touched you, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe for more biblical stories that inspire and strengthen faith. Until next time, remember that with God, no story is over until He has fulfilled His purpose.